Thank you everyone for joining. If you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself yet, please feel free to add a chat message to the right using that introduction bar. And then we will go ahead and get started. I'm joined here today by Jeff Moore, who is the CEO of Kumu and an expert in systems mapping himself. But he will be introducing us to the Kumu platform and how to get started, since I know that everyone is in the beginning stages of building their systems map for the course. As we go through, you can please feel free to add any questions in the chat box to the right, and we will aggregate those and feed them to Jeff as we go along. With that, I will turn it over to Jeff, and feel free to jump in, Jeff, and get started.
Okay, perfect. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to hop on these office hours. What we'll basically do today is just spend the first bit of time giving you a quick overview of Kumu, just so you can understand what the layout looks like and some other examples that you might run into. And then we'll spend the bulk of the time just really focusing in on how to use your like the basic first steps in mapping with Kumu. There we go. I had an echo going for a sec. And so we'll basically be able to use the course template to show you, okay, how to create your first elements and connections, create your first loop, and then we'll save a bunch of time at the end to be able to ask any questions that you have, whether you haven't gotten into Kumu yet and just have some curiosities, or if you're struggling to kind of make certain things work in Kumu, happy to spend some time answering any of those questions. So Amy, I'm just going to share my screen and let me know when this comes through. See that now?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, perfect. So if you go throughout the systems practice course, there's a number of links out to where you can get started with Kumu. It'll take you out to this link, kumu.io/courses/systems practice. Essentially, this is a course-specific landing page that you can use to set up a free private account on Kumu. So normally the way Kumu is set up, if you want to keep a map private, which means you get to choose who can view it, that's a paid offering, but we've made free private accounts available for everyone who's taking this course. And so when you do get started with Kumu, just make sure that you're coming through this page, because that's the only way to get set up with one of these free private projects. You'll see when you come to this page, if you aren't logged in yet, it's going to prompt you to either register for account. So if you've never created an account before, click this button. If you already have an account, but you just need to create this workspace, or you just haven't signed in yet, just click this sign in link. Once you do that, when you come to this page, it'll either tell you to create a big green button to tell you to create a course workspace project, or if you've already done that, it'll tell you to access it. And so I'll click that here. And this will take us into the project within Kumu. And I just want to spend a little bit of time telling you about kind of the layout here, and then we'll toggle over and I'll show you a couple other examples before we get into the actual step-by-step of how to build Kumu. But when you first land on Kumu, the way to understand how the UI is set up is the visual kind of map, those circles and the lines are always off here to this right side. On this left side, we have a panel which gives you a bit more information about the map itself. So if we don't have anything selected, this is what we call the map overview. And when you come into this course workspace, we'll give you some basic instructions to get started. You can also click on any one of these circles or lines. So we call the circles elements and the lines connections. And then you can also click on this bold text. So this is the loop or the loop label. And you'll see anytime I click on any one of these, this left side is changing. And so this becomes a way to add some additional context, background, definitions, other information about what you're mapping, and you can save all of that right here. Up at the top, you'll see the name of your project, and then these two drop downs are to be able to switch between different maps within your project. So you'll see here in this example course workspace, you have an example completed map that we can switch to. We can switch back to this first examples page, and then there's a map called your personal workspace, which is meant to be where you'd actually build out the map that you're building as part of the course within Kumu. This right side lets you change between what are called views. We're going to come back to that later on, so don't worry about that right now. But that's just a general gist of kind of the main elements of the UI. And then down here, you'll see this plus button. This is the primary place where you come to add any content to your map. So to add a factor, to add a connection between two factors, to actually add a loop label. And again, we'll spend a lot more time in a bit walking through how to do that. So before we dive into that, I just wanted to give you a quick example of some other systems maps that have been built on Kumu, just so you have a sense of what's possible. So here is a map that was built by an organization called the Democracy Fund, their governance program team. And so this map is essentially trying to get at the question, which is, how is Congress fulfilling or failing to fulfill its obligations to the American people? And so you'll see, right, this starts to be a little bit more complex than some of the other maps you saw in the other sample workspace. Lots of different colors, some different thicknesses and lines. And so the way to think about how all of that works is through what we call views in Kumu. So views are just a way to add some decorations, to add some colors, to kind of bring some of the insights and some of the context to life in the maps that you're creating. So if I come in, if I click on any one of these circles, you'll see there's a name, right, of that circle that they created, demands and pressures on Congress. And they've saved some other information to it, so that it's a deep structure, that there's dynamic impact. The key thing to think about is like, hey, okay, great. I can come into a specific circle on the map and then add some information. And then what I can basically do is create decorations based on whatever information I add to that profile. So in this case, there's this idea of a deep structure that's at play in the map that they've colored red and created thicker lines. If you look at the colors, so these colors relate to, in the lower left corner, they've marked some of the yellow circles as those are reinforcing core stories. The blue represent outside factors. And so there's just, you can add a little bit more depth to what you're mapping by being able to actually save some information about each of the circles and then create a decoration rule later on to be able to bring that to life. Here's another example that was built out as part of a project in Hawaii, trying to map the dynamics around Hawaii quality of life. And I just bring this up for another example where you can see how they've built the basic structure of a map, right? So you can see the circles and the connections. And then in this case, they're using color just to be able to indicate and highlight certain factors on the map. So they're trying to show, to bring your eye to quality of public policy, to intergroup agility as kind of key factors in this overall map. And if you're exploring on Kumu, you may see a couple other types of maps. So Kumu is not just built to be able to do systems maps and cause loop diagrams. People also map stakeholders on it. You may also see kind of these more floaty interactive maps of people. And just know there's a lot of flexibility. Kumu is really built to be just a general purpose relationship visualization platform for helping people better understand complex challenges. And so if you see other examples, those are possible. What we're focusing on for the rest of this time is really looking at how do you use Kumu for doing a systems map. So let's dive in. So if you want to, you can try to follow along. Otherwise, you may have already done some of these steps, but if you go and create your systems practice workspace, you'll be dropped in on this page. And so I'm just going to walk through the instructions that we have here on the left so you can see an example of how all of this works. We've created some initial elements, right? So those are the circles, and some connections, which are the lines between circles. And so let me just walk through some basic steps of kind of moving things around. So if you click and drag any of the circles that you've added, you can reposition those on the map. And then wherever you let go, it'll stay there. If you need to kind of change the curvature of any of these connections, you can just drag that in and out. And that's what allows you to maybe make sure connections aren't overlapping, or just try to have a map feel a little bit cleaner. You can add a new element just by clicking this green plus button at the bottom. And so we'll build out another loop here around partisan news media. And so let me click add element, and I can type partisan news media in this box that shows up at the bottom, and then just hit enter. And you'll see that element gets added to the map, and then I can drag this wherever I want. And as I let go, that'll stay there. To add a connection, there's a couple different ways that you can do that. The easiest one is to come and say, so if I want a connection coming out of Partisan News Media, first just click on Partisan News Media, and then I can click plus again, and then click Add Connection, and just type the connection of what I want that to go to. And so in this case, we're talking about how Partisan News Media leads to amplification, hardening of partisan views. Enter, that connection's now created. Again, I can move this, I can drag this wherever I want it, and then I can also drag this connection. So again, just to remind you, click the green plus button, you can choose add element, you can also click add connection, and that's the easy way to be able to add those to the map. One other shortcut, which ends up being really helpful for folks, is just to hold the Alt or Option key on your keyboard. So you'll find that kind of a little 2 keys over to your space bar usually. If you hold Alt, I can just click anywhere on the map, and that lets us add a new factor. And so I'm going to do that again just with some other sample elements you can see. I'm just holding Alt and then clicking on the background, and that ends up creating an element right in that space. And so it's a great kind of quick way to create an element, be able to position it wherever you want. You can also hold Alt and drag from another connection. So you'll see if I do that while I'm holding Alt, if I come out here, there's an arrow following my cursor, and I can drop it on any other circle that I want, and then I can actually create connections that way too. So if I come to factor 1, hold Alt and drag, and then drop on Partisan News Media, that creates that connection as well. So it's a nice kind of quicker way versus coming here, clicking plus, clicking add connection, and then having to type factor 1. But no, either of those are possible. I'd say we normally see people get started kind of using this plus button and then slowly work towards using that Alt or Option key shortcut. One last thing I want to show you on just the steps to add basic elements and connections. If you come down here and click plus and then you choose Sketch, Sketch is basically a mode that's really built for people who are building systems maps. What it essentially does is makes the default behavior when you're holding Alt, it makes that the default behavior anytime you're interacting with the map. And so what that means is I can just click once I'm in sketch mode and then add another element or factor and just hit enter. I don't have to hold Alt, and I can just drag to connect and drop. And so it just makes it be a much faster way. I can even drag from factor 2 and let go off the map and then create another element. And so if you're trying to build out maps quickly, switching into this sketch mode can be really helpful. Anytime you're in this, you'll see this green circle turns to be a pencil. And then you'll see in the lower right, there's both an instructions link and then a link to exit. And if I click exit, I'll switch back to the normal mode. And again, to activate sketch mode, just come in here, click plus and click sketch, and you'll know you'll be in that when you see this pencil icon. So if you're building out kind of, say you've done some of your maps on paper, you've done some initial causal loop diagrams outside of Kumu, sketch mode can be a great way to be able to click and populate everything that you need to into Kumu.
Jeff, we've had 2 questions come in so far. So one is from Mary in Michigan, who's just asking if multiple people on her team can all view and edit the same map. And then the other is about adding colors to a map.
Okay, great. So we'll get to the colors one in just a second. On the multiple people, so yes, you can add any number of people to this same project, and you can collaboratively build out a map. The way that that's done, in this upper left corner, you'll see these 3 bars. If you click there, you can come down into members, and then just either if someone's already on Kumu and you know their username, you can type that there. Otherwise, you can type in their email address. And then if you click add contributor, that'll add that person, and then they'll get an email invitation to join the map. What that means is, yeah, both of you can edit at the same time. If you are editing the exact same kind of circle at the exact same time, there is a chance that you'll both kind of make an edit that conflicts with each other. We'll pop up a window when that happens. And then the basic key part, if you're working with lots of people on the same map, is to refresh your browser regularly. So click the refresh button what that does is every time you click refresh, that pulls in the latest changes that other people have made. And if you are working at the same time as someone else and there's another change that's made, you'll get like a count notification in the lower right corner that says 5 updates, meaning like there's been 5 changes since you've last refreshed your map based on other people working on it at the same time. So let me hop in to just show you really quickly how to add a loop label, and then we'll switch over to showing you how to do the decorations. So the basic way to think about loops in Kumu is it's better and easier to think about them as a loop label. So what I mean by that is when you're adding a loop in Kumu, you first need to actually build each of these different kind of elements or factors, and then you need to add each of the individual connections. And then once you do that, you can actually add a loop label. So for example, up here, say we want to add a loop label to this loop. And so this loop is essentially as the literacy rate drops, the level of employment increases. As the level of unemployment increases, the level of poverty increases. And as the level of poverty increases, then the literacy rate further decreases. So it's representing this idea of a reinforcing cycle. It's like a vicious cycle. And so if we want to actually add one of these labels to this loop, we need to come down here and click plus, and then click add loop. And this tells you to then just click on the connections that you want to include in the loop. So I can click here, I can click here, and I can click here. The order doesn't matter, just make sure you've selected the ones that should be part of that loop, and you'll know they're selected because they kind of turn thick and darker. And then add the loop label. And so this is good to usually be descriptive, right? Tell a bit of the story about what's going on. In this case, like we can just call it a vicious cycle and hit enter. And that'll add that bolded text. And that makes it so we can click on that label as well. And then you could actually come in here and add a description about what's going on. And so really great to always include the kind of the story behind the dynamics that you're seeing. In terms of, okay, what's going on, what's playing out here, what's the essential kind of underlying dynamic that's at play. And then that way, anytime you're clicking on one of these loops, you'll be able to see that. Let me toggle over so you can see an example here. So if I click on government obligations, you'll see in this case, we've spelled out that it's a reinforcing loop, and it's talking about, okay, government spending is often a zero-sum situation if the pie is not growing. And so you can just imagine how you can give people a lot more context to what you're mapping. So when they land in, they don't just understand like, okay, what do you mean by this? You can actually give them that background that you've worked so hard to kind of create in your different workshops that you've done to be able to create your loops.
And 2 more questions.
Yep.
And you can adjust these whenever it makes sense, but one that came in from Patience, is it possible to put a readable version of the final map on a Word or PDF document for clients that don't use Kumu? And then how to print out and share the map when it's in progress.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm happy to touch on those now. So 2 options for that. So basically, at any point in time, you can always create directly from your computer a high resolution screenshot. So if you click the More menu in the lower right corner, you can then come down and then choose to capture screenshot. What that'll do is that captures whatever the visible map is right now for you on your screen, and pretty high resolution. So it basically triples the resolution of your screen. So just try to get whatever like map you want visible. If you want to zoom in, only get a certain part of the map, you can do that as well. So you can do more and then capture screenshot. If you need a really high resolution, more of like a vector file, you can request a PDF from us. They're $9 per PDF, and it's just a bit of a manual process on our side. So that may be better saved for when you get down to a finished map and you need to be able to create that. But try the screenshot first. It's usually good enough for most PowerPoints. But if you're going to then print this map out on, say, like a big 4-foot by 6-foot page, that's when you'd want to actually do the PDF. You can also share with others too. If you want to share an interactive version of your map and they're not part of Kumu, if you click share or embed this map, you can then choose to create an embed share link. This is a link you can send to anyone who can access the interactive view-only version of your map without having to actually log into Kumu. So it can be a great way to share kind of work in progress or even show people your finished map. You can just send them this. They can still zoom in, zoom out. They can still click on any of these circles to understand and see what you've added or the loop labels, and then be able to kind of view that without having to go through the step of actually creating a Kumu account. So let me walk through one other step on the connections, just to make sure you know how to add these plus and minus symbols to them. And then we'll hop into how to do a basic decoration. So say we come in here and we click on this connection, and we want to indicate that kind of as partisan news media increases, right, we have more amplification and hardening of partisan views. And so that would be kind of a plus on this side and a plus on this side as well. So we've clicked on the connection. Over here to the left, you'll see there's kind of a placeholder text which says add connection type. Anything here in this profile, just think about it as the mental model is click to be able to edit what you want. And so if we click there, you'll see these options already listed. So we have plus, 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 minus, minus, plus. Yep.
Can you just share your screen again? I think it might have gotten interrupted by someone else sharing their screen.
Oh, okay. Let me do that.
Thanks.
Can you see the screen now?
Yes, now it works.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. So let me, yeah, so the basic step is coming in, clicking on a connection, right? So if we want to add the plus and minus symbols, you'll see on this left-hand side, there's light text which says add connection type. So click on that, and that brings up these options. So we can choose plus, plus, and if we click done, that's essentially adding a plus, right, to the beginning of the arrow and then a plus to the end of the arrow. If you wanted to change this to be a plus at the beginning and a minus at the end, you just click plus minus, right? So relatively easy to change those. So let's keep this as plus plus. And that'll automatically show up on both ends of the connection. And so as you're going through, when you add the connection, just make sure you're saving those values so that you know exactly kind of what the causality is between each of the different factors. So let me switch over, and now let's talk about decorations. So in your workspace, you'll find, this is actually one of the maps from the Hawaii Quality of Life project. And so you'll see basically an example here with using some basic colors. We've saved information here around like the basic categories of what's going on. So anything right now you'll see in this kind of light blue color is government, whereas this, or like teal color, this blue color is citizen engagement, and then this purple color is economy. And so the first thing to remember about decorations in Kumu is you're always saving something to the profile of each of these circles before you try to color it. You're not just coming in and saying, okay, I want this circle to be orange, this circle to be blue, and this circle to be purple. Instead, you're saving some information to this profile that captures what you'd try to decorate by. And so in this case, right, we have basic categories of the map. You may save other things as one of the things you might add is a tag about whether something's part of your deep structure or not. So here you'll see this field here is the tags field. It's pretty easy to be able to add any information you want, and think of tags as just a quick way to store short tidbits of information about what you're mapping. So if I wanted this to be citizen engagement, I could click that, and that'll get added there. If there's something else I want to add as well, maybe this is just a really important connection. We want to be able to flag that and color that later. You can just type that text and hit enter, and then that'll get saved as a connection here. You could also use a field instead. So if I click that add new field button and maybe added like a sector field, and then in this case, I could say NGO. You can add additional information here to capture what it is you want to try to track for your map. And so it's up to you whether you use tags or these separate fields, but know the central mental model you need for decorations is first save some information to this left profile, and then we're essentially creating a rule about, okay, anytime it says citizen engagement, let's color a circle blue, or let's color a circle purple. And so let me just walk through how that's done. I'm actually going to create a new view so that we can start from scratch. So views are essentially the things that allow you to be able to add decorations, to be able to add filters. If you create a new view and it looks like you've lost the styling, you may just need to come back and switch this template back to systems. You only need to do that anytime you're creating a new view. If you're editing the existing views, you shouldn't need to do that. And so basically what I did, I opened up this settings bar on this right-hand side, and this allows me to change things like decorations, and then other basic settings and colors and sizes of text for your map. But if we want to go to decorate, say we want to add that, say we want to add the purple color based on it being citizen engagement. If we click add element rule, we can come here and then choose what we want to decorate. So make sure this is decorate custom selection. And then in this case, we're looking at tags, and you want to do contains citizen engagement. So you're basically creating a rule that says anytime there is a tag which is citizen engagement, let's change the color. So in this case, we want it to be purple. And then let's choose a lighter purple down here. And then at the very bottom, we can add a legend entry. So if I type citizen engagement, this is actually going to show up in the lower left corner. And then click done. And so now anything with citizen engagement is marked with this purple color. And so you need to set up that decoration rule once. And then what's nice is say this one should actually be marked as citizen engagement. We can come in here and click citizen engagement, and it's automatically going to inherit that purple color. And so decorations basically work like that. You're creating the rule, saving the information to the profile for that element or connection, and then that decoration automatically gets applied. So let me pause in case any questions came up in that part.
I don't see any questions right now, but if people do have questions, this is just a reminder that you can add them to the chat box, which is to the right on your toolbar.
Perfect. Yeah, and one of the things too to keep in mind, where we see people struggle a bit more with Kumu is when they're jumping too far ahead into like decorations and trying to make the map look really pretty versus first thinking about building out the structure. And so I'd say focus first on creating the loops within Kumu, kind of creating the overall structure of the map, and then starting to save some of this underlying information here into these profiles. And then you can start adding those decorations. But it's usually good to kind of stage that so you're focused first on structure, and then second on being able to add some of that supporting information about each of the elements, connections, and loops that you're creating. And then that final step is, okay, what are the different decorations that we need to add to really tell a more compelling story about the map that we're building?
Great. And we just had one question come in from Juan David. What about the different kinds of lines that you use in the map? How can you make those?
Yeah, so the if you're asking about like the dotted lines versus the solid lines, that is automatically added based on you using the plus and minus kind of format for the connection type. So for example, if I come in here and actually remove that, so if I was to kind of take out the plus and minus, this is going to kind of revert just to a solid line. So anytime that you have what's called an opposite connection, so opposite means kind of as one factor changes, the other has a change in the opposite direction, then this will get that dotted line decoration applied in addition to having plus and minus show up there. If you need to then decorate, so one of the things that you might commonly do is try to make sure that the deep structure of the map really stands out. So for example, here, we've added the tag deep structure to each of the connections that are in this deep structure. So one of the decorations that we can then add is just to change the size of the connections based on it having that tag. So if I click add connection rule, we can choose to decorate a custom selection. In this case, it's anytime tags contains deep structure. And so it's important to use contains anytime it's tags, just because this is basically says, okay, let's just find just deep structure versus the exact set of tags. So just remember to pick contains when you're creating this decoration with the tags field. So tags contains deep structure, and then we can come in and say, let's change the size, maybe make this like 20, and then click done. And then now those connections are going to be a lot thicker. And so you can more clearly like indicate, okay, this is the deep structure. You might want to further reinforce this by, say, changing the color, right? So maybe we want this to really stand out by having those be red. We can do that and add a deep structure entry to the legend and click done. And then now that's going to show up even more. But again, the steps are, first, you're making sure you've either added the deep structure as a tag or as a separate field, and then you're coming in here to the settings, creating a decoration rule, and then specifying, okay, here's the actual like style that I want to apply for those kind of connections.
Great. We have one more question too about how you can remove something from the map while you're in progress.
Okay. So like say if, I'm hearing that as kind of, okay, I need to delete a given element. So let me speak to that. And if I'm not answering your question, just like re-clarify it. So say we come in and we find out that for some reason, this blame government circle it's not a factor that we actually want to have on the map anymore. So if you click on blame government, you can come down here and click delete, this icon down here. And then that'll prompt you to make sure you want to delete it, and you can click OK. And that'll delete both that element and any related connections to it. You can also do that by, say, for a specific connection. You can click on it. You either come down here and click the delete icon, or if you hit delete on your keyboard, it'll also work the same way. And so we can delete that connection. When that happens, those basically get removed from the map. So they're not in this specific map. It still exists in the like underlying project data. So if we were to come back and add the blame government element, as we're starting to type this, right, it says, oh, hey, we're still finding that element in the data set. If I hit enter, it's going to bring it back with some of that profile information. You'll see it doesn't bring back any of the connections that were there before, but blame government still kind of exists in the background because we still have the government and citizen engagement tag. If you want to fully delete something, it's basically, think of it on your computer like you have a trash can when you delete files. Kumu has the same thing, and that's located up here in this menu, and you come to trash, and you can just say destroy all, and that'll completely empty it. So once we do that, then the blame government element would be completely gone, and it's nowhere. It's not even going to show up as you're searching for it.
That's helpful. Another question about how to edit words or sentences.
Yeah, so if you're editing, if you're editing the kind of label on the map, right, just click on this and it becomes editable, and then you could change this, add words to this or not, delete, and you just hit enter and that gets saved. Same thing for these loops. You just need to click on the center of that loop label, and we could say remove the deep structure part from that if we wanted to. When it comes down to actually adding paragraph text here, again, the mental model is click to edit anything that you want to in this profile. So when we click in the center of that, this becomes like paragraph text that we can edit. You're going to enter and add a new sentence if you want to. You can even upload an image. So say you have a picture that's really representative of one of the dynamics that's going on. If you click upload an image, you can actually go look on your computer and then be able to find an image you want to upload. And then there's also the ability to do some formatting in here that's done with something called Markdown. So if you click that link, this takes you out to how that style works. The basic way to think about it is there's little things that you can add, little characters you can add to do things like bolding or links. And so if I add, for example, 2 asterisks around a given word or phrase, I can make that bold, or I can add bullets. So I'd say, again, don't get too stuck in that. But if you really need bullets, you really need to add a heading, click this format text with Markdown link, and that'll take you out to how you do each of those things.
And people are clearly worried that they might make mistakes. So they're also wondering how you have an undo button or undo the last change.
Down here in this lower left corner, you'll see as I'm making changes, it says you updated R21 government's description, and then there's this undo button. So I can click that, and that's going to revert the change that was made. What you want to be careful though, so you'll see now this says you renamed. If I refresh, here one sec. So here, actually, this is a good thing to talk through. So you'll see when I went to refresh, it prompted me and said, hey, are you sure you want to leave this page? You have unsaved changes. So one of the things to remember is as you're editing these view settings over here, by adding a decoration or adding the deep structure color, you'll see at the bottom it says you made changes to this view. Do you want to save or revert? So you'll want to click save before you leave. Otherwise, those changes won't get saved. If you're adding content to the map, so say I add, for example, a factor here to this map, anytime you do that, that automatically gets saved. As you add a connection, that automatically gets saved. As you add a description here, that automatically gets saved. The trick is just when you're editing the settings over here to add a decoration, that's an explicit step where you need to save those changes before they get pushed into the kind of server database of ours. But now that I've saved that, if I click refresh, when I come back in, you'll see we've lost. There's no more activity history in the lower left corner. So that activity and undo button only works within the current, what's called like browser session. So you can make a change. Say we want to change, for example, this to, say we remove the minus minus. We're like, uh-oh, we didn't really want to do that. We can click undo, and that'll bring that back on. But basically, the trick is you don't want to then refresh because you're going to lose the ability to do that. Any other questions?
Yes. What about adding videos from YouTube? Is that possible?
So it is possible. Let me show you. So what I'm switching out to, so you'll get linked out to this occasionally from within the Kumu UI. We have a docs website, which is a place that gives some more details about kind of how to do anything that you'd want to within Kumu. On this left-hand side, there's the table of contents. And so you can search through this or search up here. So say you search for YouTube up here, it'll bring up this widgets page. And so this walks through how to do things like drop in a Vimeo video or a YouTube video. And so just follow these instructions here. It's basically kind of adding this text and then putting in the ID of the YouTube video. And then it'll show up kind of embedded within that profile. So you can do it either within this overall map or within a given loop description. Anywhere where you see this type of box when you edit it, you can add a widget to that. It can also be like people will also do presentations from speaker deck are things we've seen there before, or audio files too are also stuff that we've seen people include.
Sounds pretty fancy. Patience is saying she finds it difficult selecting loops. Any tips on how to do that?
So think of it as like you want to try to click at the center of the label that you've created. So it's always going to be right at the center of the text. And so if you think about that as the way, it's not just like anywhere on the loop, it is just the center of that loop label. That's going to make it a lot easier to click on it.
That looks like all the questions we have at this point. I don't know if there's final things you want to get to, Jeff, to make sure we cover.
Yeah, so let's just, again, let's touch base again on the collaboration step. So say you wanted to add people in, right? You're coming up to this menu in the upper left corner where these 3 bars are. And then you click members and you can invite them there. If you've created any embeds, those also exist here. And again, if you want to create that, just click this button and then that'll give you this link as well. This can often be a great way to if you're submitting something to the Plus Acumen platform for the course, either using an embed link because it lets anyone be able to view it if they've seen that, or creating a screenshot using the feature down here in this lower right corner. Those are great ways to be able to share the map with other people who don't actually have access via this members screen. You can, if you're interested, we do have like this concept of presentations. And so what they are is it basically lets you walk through a map step by step We won't go through how to kind of create those in depth. That's something, if you're interested, reach out and we can help like show you how to do that. And we can also touch on that in kind of office hours later in the course. But let me just show you one quick example so you know what's possible there. So this is an example of a presentation built with the Hawaii quality of life maps. So when I click start, I can have some text slides. And I can just click next to work through it, and then I can be brought into specific map slides. These slides, you can still zoom in and out, you can still click on certain pieces, and then you can have custom text over here on the left to describe each of the slides, but it's just a nice way to be able to actually script an unfolding of a map so that you can guide people along a given story. And again, we have more information about how to do that on the docs website. If you come down here, you'll see a presentations section. But again, I'd say the thing to try to not do is get too far ahead of yourself. Really focus first on building out the different structures, right? So add the elements, add the connections, add the loops. And then once you have that and you've added some of the decorations, you can do a final step of actually building that presentation to make it easier for other people to kind of walk through the unfolding of your map. Any other questions?
Can you do a refresher on how to tag?
Yes. Yeah. So for example, say let's come in and economic performance. We'll click on this circle. So tags always show up here. You'll see them represented as kind of these white boxes with a gray outline. If you hover over this field, you'll see this pencil icon show up. So you can either click that or just click anywhere in that area. And then just add, so say this was like a highly influential element. You can type that text and hit enter, and then that'll get saved, right? Or maybe this is part of, like, you have a whole strand about like things related to like increasing GDP. You could hit enter, and that'll get saved. So once that information's saved there, you could then be able to create a decoration based on that. And let me walk through too with the fields down here. Again, you'll see one that's already created. Once you get to the step of doing a leverage analysis within your map, if you click here, you'll see there's predefined prompts for you to pick for. So whether a given element or connection is frozen, whether there's energy for change, whether it's a mixed bag, whether you're seeing bright spots, whether it's part of like ripple effects that are going on. So there's a way to actually define the choices for the different fields you're adding. Again, for most people, tags is enough. But if you feel like, hey, I have a lot of additional information that I want to save, I want to add sector, right? Or maybe I want to add a trend field. And then I want to be able to say that this is increasing, right? Or decreasing. That's stuff that you can do with fields. And then if you want to actually change this to force people to pick between kind of options in a list, you can come down and then choose settings. And then we can actually have people pick from a list instead of an autocomplete. So we could say increasing, flat, decreasing. And so in a way, what you're setting back here is more of a database. And we can force people to pick between those options. And then when I click save, if I come back out and then click on economic performance again and click on trend, it's going to force me to pick between those three options.
A few more questions here.
Okay.
Is there an integration of Kumu in Slack?
So Kumu in Slack there's a new kind of like sister product we've created called Compass that does more of like visualizing the communication patterns that are going on in Slack rather than an integration of like what you're mapping here, kind of linking back out to updates or notifications in Slack.
Great. And then do you select the loops before tagging?
So think of the loop, like the loop is a separate entity, right? So the loop label itself can get tags, and each of the individual connections in here can also get tags. So if I click on this connection, right, this has the deep structure loop, that has the deep structure tag. This loop label doesn't actually have that tag, right? So it's not that you tag this loop label and then everything in here inherits those tags. It's that you need to actually come through to each of these connections and then mark deep structure, right? So we're marking each of these. As I click, you'll see they all have deep structure on them. And so one thing that kind of comes up occasionally is if people want to select multiple things at once. So say you don't want to click each one and then add deep structure. You can click, and if you hold Shift, you can select multiple connections and then add a tag or add a value at the same time. And so we could come in here and just click Edit. We could remove the deep structure, say if we wanted, by clicking Exit there, and then that'll save it and have it removed. We could add back, so maybe we're calling this the core story, and that can get saved. We can type in deep structure, and then that information will get shown up here. So again, hold Shift. You can select multiple elements too. Or if you want to say, if you need to select an entire portion of a map, you can hold Shift and kind of draw a box, and that'll select what is within that box.
Great. And a question from Mary, how long will we have access to the map in Kumu?
So you'll have access till kind of end of the course, and then about a month after, just to make sure you have time to kind of continue using it, sharing it with whoever you want to. Ongoing private use after that, there'll be eventually a time where that peters out, roughly 3 weeks to a month after. And it's not that that's going to get converted to be public. At a certain point, it'll just get locked. And if you want to continue using that, the private projects are roughly $9 per month. And it's no per user charge. It's just a flat $9 per project.
Great.
And you can always export a screenshot or export the data or request a PDF from us to be able to have that available on an ongoing basis.
Great. And thanks again for making it available for free to all the course participants to use during this time.
Of course. One other thing for people who prefer to work in a bit more of a table format. So we do have this, you'll see it's available in this lower right corner where it looks kind of like a spreadsheet icon. If you click this will take you to a tabular view of each of the circles that are in your map. And then you can switch up here to look at the connections instead. But if you need to go through and maybe add tags for all of the different factors in your map or go through and add descriptions, this can be a fast way to do that. You can just click through, you can hit enter to add a tag here. So maybe say this is deep structure also, and you can click to add that and then click save. So this is a nice way to be able to do some of that if you prefer to edit in more of a tabular form. But it's basically the same thing that you're doing here. It's all rippling back to update this underlying profile.
Great. We have just a few minutes left, so if anyone has additional questions, please feel free to add them now. Otherwise, I will remind you that Jeff will be back in 2 weeks for a second office hour session. So if you do encounter challenges as you start to dig in and build the map, you can save those and we will have another chance to get those questions answered. And some people have asked if there will be a recording of this, and the answer is yes, we'll be posting that to the course page. So you can go back and refresh if you need a screencast again of all the steps.
And if you're on the docs page
Yeah,
again, I was just going to mention here, if you're, we also have this systems practice specific page here that walks through a bit more with some sample introductory videos about, specifically doing your first loops, walking through kind of each of the steps that we walk through today. So again, that's located at docs.kumu.io. And if you scroll down, you'll see under this discipline section, just click systems practice. So this can be another great way to get a bit of a refresher if you prefer to kind of read written guidance rather than watching a video.
Great, very helpful. So it looks like we don't have any more questions at this point. Jeff, I don't know if you have any final words of advice for people as they get started?
Feel free to reach out if people are struggling at all. We have email support done through support@kumu.io. So feel free to reach out there or to ping anyone in the course, and they can redirect any of the questions to us as well. But yeah, just take your time, really focus on kind of getting built the structure of your map first and adding the elements and connections. And then as you get to some of the fancier decorations that you want to add, save that for a little bit down the road, or send us a note and we can help walk through kind of how to add those if you're struggling with them at all. We'll also be following up. There's a new decoration we released that makes the whole leverage analysis part of systems maps way easier. So we're going to be following up with an email on that we'll likely try to send to everyone who is signed up for Kumu. So keep an eye out for that. It basically lets you add multiple colors around a single circle really easily. And so you'll see that from us in another week or two.
Thank you so much, Jeff. There's multiple notes in the chat box thanking you for your time and saying this was a really helpful introduction. So we appreciate it.
Thank you all for taking the time.
Great. And just as a reminder, so next Tuesday, we will have another office hour session with Karen Groton of Engaging Inquiry to help you answer any additional questions about that next step in the systems practice course. And then Jeff will join us again October 31st for another Kumu tutorial. So hope to see you all then, and thanks again.
Perfect.